Good evening and welcome back to Ukra Life. My name is Sarah Slimp and I am an American living and working in Kyiv. I've been doing some segments about relationships with the United States and Ukraine, looking at American news topics, looking specifically at the election and some of the legal proceedings that have been going on over the last couple of weeks. But today I wanted to take the opportunity to do a more casual discussion, looking at specifically relationships and how narratives in the West or in the United States, for example, are covering Ukraine, what kinds of stories are coming from the United States about Ukraine, and just looking at how they're effective and why I think they're really important and maybe stronger than other narratives that have been going on in the rest of the world. We've discussed a lot of these specific news reports, and I've been attending some different panels and discussions across Kyiv, from American diplomats to Ukrainian reporters, looking at how to tell the story. We're 2 years into the war now, and how are we going to garner more support for Ukraine from the United States? That's a really big topic of discussion within politics, and I think looking at different publications or reports coming from the United States and how they're effective is a great way to just rethink and reset in a specific way. Maybe think about what kinds of ways we can communicate our own stories. And so that's what I want to do today. If I'm looking down, I have some notes that I just want to be making sure I'm getting my information correct, looking at the op-eds that I've chosen from the New York Times and the Washington Post to look over and review. I'll see if I can link them in the description of this video so that you can also look at these reports afterwards. And I want to thank you for joining, and let's go right into it. Starting with looking at just the United States in general. Right now, there is a lot going on, as we've discussed over the last couple of weeks, with the election coming up, legal proceedings, as I mentioned, in addition to just different information and reports focusing on healthcare and the national border security bills, and Congress as well. And as I was just taking a look through different publications such as the New York Times today, Ukraine is buried within those other reports. And it's important as we look at news articles as well to see how effective they are. And despite administrations always, or not always, but having a majority agreement that we just basically cannot let President Putin's aggression be tolerated, there's now a shift within the United States to questioning whether or not we should support Ukraine. And we've discussed this in great detail over the last couple of weeks, specifically within Congress and Speaker of the House Mike Johnson not putting forward a bill or passing the bill for Ukraine aid right now. There was a report earlier this week from the Washington Post that even Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican from Georgia, has said that if the Speaker will put forward a bill for more money to Ukraine, that she will basically make an effort to remove him from his post. We saw this happen in October with the past Speaker of the House, and so there is some legitimate weight within this threat if he does this, despite him saying and his intention to aid Ukraine. Although it's not a priority intention, he has shared that he wants to help Ukraine, wants to aid Ukraine. And so the first op-ed that I've picked for today that I think is really important when it comes to garnering support from the American population or the general population is one from Dan Coates that was published yesterday with the New York Times. It's titled "What We Lose If We Let Putin Win." And this, basically, the general story when I was reading it, was that despite this America First conversation that is being had in the United States when it comes to discussing aid, aiding Ukraine is putting America first. There's this whole debate that we can't help Ukraine, we can't put more money into Ukraine until we put more money into the United States. And he argues that as a country, we've viewed Russia as a strong or strategic competitor for years. He uses instances like the Cold War, specifically that we put billions and trillions of dollars into arming the United States and preparing for more massive war or an escalation. And he argues that, bluntly, in dollar terms, supporting Ukraine is the least expensive way to fight Russia for the United States initially, or to weaken Russia's military, as he says, to discourage Russian aggression, thereby protecting ourselves and our own allies. My overall opinion on this op-ed and why I think it's really strategic is because it's concise and it's clear. It's about a 5 to 10 minute read if you are fluent in English, probably a little bit longer if you're not. And he uses examples that the average American has either experienced or knows a great deal about, such as the Cold War, in order to connect with them. I think something that we've discussed in the panel discussions I've attended over the last couple of weeks is people need a connection to something in order to either have a strong feeling or emotion in order to emphasize or empathize. And for some Americans, a lot of people now know more about Ukraine, know somebody potentially who's either been to Ukraine, is Ukrainian, or knows something a little bit about Ukrainian culture. But for somebody who maybe has no connection, he illustrates how important it is to support Ukraine in a way that an average American can empathize or understand. Additionally, just drawing on the discussion of the Cold War, he also talks about the importance it is for NATO. Additionally, the consequences of Putin's desire to reinstate the Cold War era, as I just said. And he's crafting just this narrative of look what wars and conflicts that we've been a part of, avoiding them in the most cost-effective ways to support Ukraine. And so if you're able and you have time to give that op-ed a little look, it's called, as I mentioned, What We Lose If We Let Putin Win, written by Dan Coates, who was a part of the Trump administration. And in my opinion, it was very concise and convincing. Another strong story that I also thought was really great when it comes to garnering American support, just the general public specifically, was from Washington Post David Ignatius, who was just here recently conducting interviews. In addition, he interviewed President Zelensky, and he tells the story of when he was interviewing Zelensky, and he asked, what will happen if Congress does not support or pass support for Ukraine? And he shares that Zelensky gave a straight answer, saying that Ukraine will have to pull back, will have to move the front line, basically. And in this interview, David Ignatius illustrates how Zelensky pulls out a piece of paper and he begins to draw a map of the front line and where they would have to move in order to basically accommodate for not receiving support. And a quote from Zelensky was that the only way we can preserve this line is to shrink it because we don't have enough artillery to protect the whole one, which means we're going to have to retreat step by step. I think this is a brilliant way that David Ignatius can illustrate, I think, for the American people what will happen if this support is not passed. It's an effective tool to convey ramifications of not supporting Ukraine. And whether Zelensky intended or not to do this drawing of a map to show Ignatius what will happen, I think it was brilliant. And I think it's really a great way to put into a different perspective the ramifications. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I've been attending panel discussions with Ukrainian and American institutions in Kyiv. And the discussion is, now that we're 2 years in, Americans at first, in the first couple months, were running to support Ukraine in any possible way they could. They were seeing stories from Bucha and Irpin, the inhumane treatment of Ukrainians. And as the months went on, I've seen this in the humanitarian sector. The support isn't the same as it was in the first couple of months. And so when looking at this bill and looking at the state of the United States, it's important to think about the audience that you're speaking to and what are different ways that we can communicate with them the importance of supporting Ukraine. I know this as I live here. My friends know this as they know me because I live here, and I'm able to garner support because I can show them, experience of Ukrainians. But it's important when discussing, whether we're posting on social media, making videos like this on YouTube, how to convey an important message to bolster support, and how can we do that moving forward. And so if you have an opportunity to look at these two reports from David Ignatius and Dan Coates, I think it will give a great example of how we can do that moving forward. That's today's video. I wanted to do a short video just looking at different examples of, I think, really intriguing and also convincing messages. That's been the underlying topic of discussion over these panels that I've been doing with America House, for example, does great international panels with American diplomats and Ukrainian reporters. And overall, I think I've been to 3 or 4 of the last couple of weeks. The underlying message is we have to figure out how to tell new and innovative stories, sharing the same message, but maybe finding new tools to do that. And I think that's what these two reports do really well. So I want to thank you for joining tonight. I really appreciate your support, and I'll see you next week. Thank you very much.